All right. I think we are officially at the top of the hour and going to go ahead and get us started. I want to first welcome everybody to the February 2018 edition of FSMA Fridays, and I want to thank all of you for making times in your very busy schedules to be here today and continuing to support us. We know we got a lot of new faces and names as well, so we want to welcome all of you that are joining us for the first time. If you are new to FSMA Fridays, thanks for being here and joining us. This has actually been the longest standing industry update going, gosh, I think over 5 years now. So our goal is to just create this community and opportunity to share, related news around FSMA, changes in regulations, updates, trends and strategies. And obviously, one of the great benefits of this is an opportunity to have some Q&A with our friends at the Acheson Group, whom I will introduce here in just a moment. As mentioned, our sponsors for this, we are very pleased and grateful to have the Acheson Group, our consulting partners here each and every month. They, I guess you could say, put on loan some of their best and brightest to join us and share those updates and trends and changes in the regulations. And we're very, very fortunate to be able to tap into that resource. And on the technology side here at SafetyChain, we're a quality management system for food companies. And we are, again, very honored to sponsor this. We'll share a little bit more about each of our companies towards the end and share how we might be able to help you as well. A couple of things to keep in mind as we go. We'd like to keep this pretty informal. These are really important topics, very serious in nature. We don't take ourselves all that seriously, so we try to make it conversational, and we hope you enjoy that style. So we really want to encourage you to engage with us, ask questions. These sessions are really for you, so I want to encourage you to let us know what's on your mind and how we can help. I'll monitor those and try and pepper in where I can. If not, we will definitely have some time at the end for Q&A, and it'll also carry over into our LinkedIn group, which we'll share information about at the end. You'll notice also that only the panelists are displayed. So you see myself, Eric, and Jen is behind the scenes at SafetyChain here. So don't be shy. If you send your questions, it's just going straight to us, and we'll monitor those. We will also be recording this session and share that link in a follow-up email as well as in the LinkedIn group. So if you feel like you missed something, don't worry. We'll get you that recording within a couple of days of our session today. And of course, it is a webinar setting, so if there's any audio issues, usually the best solution is to alternate your audio source. So if you're calling in on the web, switch to the phone and vice versa. You can find all of that call-in and link info on the top corner, left-hand corner of your screen where it says Event Info. There's a little tab up there, and you can get your call-in info if you do get disconnected. You can send us a chat. We'll do our best to help you behind the scenes if we can. So what's in store for today? Always a lot moving and shaking, so we'll cover the latest news and updates, and our FSMA focus this month is to be around the produce safety rule. A lot of good info that Eric is bringing this month, and then of course we'll dig in for Q&A, time permitting, here at the end. So I want to welcome this month our friends at the Acheson Group, and specifically Eric Edmunds, who is the Food Safety Director there, brings a ton of legal, regulatory, food industry experience, so you've really got someone talking about these issues that have seen it from all sides. So, Eric, can you hear me okay? And welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, I can hear you fine. Great to be here.
All right, sounds good. So Eric's been kind enough to join us a number of times over recent months here, and it's becoming a fan favorite. So you got a little following now, Eric. So let's dig in. They're here to hear you, my friends. So there's always a lot on your radar. These were a few things that I think you wanted to touch on in terms of news since we were all last together.
Yeah, and so not all of this is kind of what's coming out of FDA right now, some of the new things happening. 2017 Retail Food Code doesn't really have direct FSMA implications, but if you're familiar with it, every 4 years the FDA releases a model food code that basically all state and local health and agricultural agencies adopt more or less word for word with some minor variations for their state health programs. And that's what they use to inspect all restaurants and grocery stores and convenience stores. There's really not a lot of updates in that one between that and the 2013 version, some new training requirements, but not a whole lot of fanfare to discuss. The other thing on the top that I put there does relate directly to this month's topic, the produce safety rule. FDA just hired a new senior science advisor. His name's Jim Gorney, as an extra tool to help implement the produce safety rule. We'll talk about it later, but at this point, the biggest issue with the produce safety rule is how is it going to be enforced? And so FDA is really ramping up their tools in that matter to make sure they're able to understand the industry and help industry comply. Jim Gorney had experience with the Produce Marketing Association before joining the FDA and has a long industry experience to help FDA with the implementation of the produce safety rule. Kind of a hot topic right now is guidance documents. We talk about them every month, it seems, because FDA is releasing new ones every month, and we'll talk about it again this month, it seems. But makes it a hot topic would do some activity coming out of the Attorney General's office that talks about kind of revamping the idea of guidance, and it's brought into some questions for some people about, do I really need to follow FDA guidance at this point if these other things are happening? But the important thing to note, all these things coming out of the Attorney General's office and the President's office talk about guidances that change the underlying law or have requirements that are additions to the underlying law, and that bind the industry or a third party to act a certain way. And the one disclaimer that all FDA guidances have right at the beginning is this is non-binding guidance. So at this point, you kind of have to look at them. FDA still does expect you to do these, all of these guidances. It's just you can look at them and make sure you don't have to follow them necessarily to the T if you're protecting food safety and meeting all of the underlying requirements of the produce safety rule.
Got it. All right.
So,
and was there anything? Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Eric.
I was just going to say that's about it for the current events, and for now is just as a brief overview. Got it.
Very, very good. And I know that we were just talking about that yesterday, those guidance documents and that infamous gray area there. So it's good to have that insight. So we're gonna focus this month on the produce safety rule, and I think like any of these things, starting off with some dates. I know you've got some important dates to be aware of. So can you talk us through some of these deadlines here to be aware of?
Yeah, well, the reason we chose to focus on the produce safety rule this month is because the first compliance deadline for the produce safety rule came last month, and you see it written there, just January 26, 2018. With the date that the rule kind of either refers them to large farms or other farms, basically the farms that don't have exemptions, so this is all farms that over the last 3 years have averaged over $500,000 in annual sales. So as of January 26, 2018, out of all the produce rule requirements that are being implemented at this point, they do have to be in compliance with all the training and programs in place and ready to go as if FDA were going to show up tomorrow. However, as we mentioned, at this point, enforcement is kind of going to be the issue and how it's going to be enforced. And so FDA has announced that they won't be starting any inspections until 2019. So even though you're required to comply FDA isn't necessarily going to be coming around for inspection. There is a chance, because over this next year, they're going to be focusing almost entirely on training and education outreach to farms in order to help them comply. Right. So there could be some chances, like we've seen with the preventive controls rule, even though people need to have preventive controls in place right now. You've been seeing some FDA inspectors or state inspectors come through and doing kind of a minor, just good manufacturing practices inspection, but not focusing on the more rigorous or new requirements. So there's a chance the FDA will be showing up, not necessarily to do an in-depth produce safety rule inspection, but they will be looking at your programs and looking for ways to help and provide advice in that situation. And we'll talk a little bit later about a program between the FDA and NASDA, where they're actually asking people to volunteer to allow them to come onto the farms.
Okay, yeah, that'll be important. So there's this ramp-up time. One question, Erica, that I know comes up a lot, and it has come up in the past, so I'll throw it out here, is you mentioned briefly a revenue number. So large farms, what's the definition of a large farm as it pertains to this compliance, and are there categories or subgroups that we need to be aware of?
Yeah, so the actual FSMA law passed by Congress creates some exemptions and some provisions the FDA had to follow and put into the new rule. And it basically creates, there's a complete exemption for farms that have under $25,000 in annual sales. So they're basically hobby farms, small farms, and aren't really producing a lot. And then there's something that's known as the Tester-Hagen Amendment, more commonly known as the Tester Amendment, or as FDA has put it into rule, the Qualified Farm Exemption, where if you're selling under $500,000 per year and selling all of that produce within your state or within 250 miles of your farm, you have some modified requirements that don't require quite as much. And then they call small farms any farm that has less than $500,000 a year in sales. And so small farms don't actually have their compliance deadline until next January. So these large farms that have to comply now is any farm that has over $500,000 in annual sales. And that's averaged over the last 3 years on a rolling basis. Okay. So, got it. Here's the key.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you for clarifying that. Supply chain, obviously, with produce plays a big role here, and so there's some dates and updates here you want to cover for us.
Yeah. So this kind of brings into play. What do if I'm purchasing food from a farm, what do I need to do in order to verify my supply chain or meet supply chain controls for the preventive controls rule? Or even a retail store would probably be doing this as well when they have a direct relationship with a farm or a producer. And that is verifying that they're actually following the produce safety rule. So right now you don't necessarily have the FDA inspection to rely on, so you may be having to rely on third-party audits or visiting farms yourself just to make sure that they're implementing and compliant with the produce safety rule for the products they're producing. And that isn't actually now, so that first compliance deadline for this Foreign Supplier Verification Program is actually July 26, 2018. So it kind of gives you a point now where you see the farms had to comply as of last month, and now the FDA has given basically the farms 6 months to get their program in place so the people that have to verify their supply chain with the Foreign Supplier Verification Program can then have the information available to comply with the Foreign Supplier Program in July. So it's basically a 6-month window that they provided to give the foreign supplier or importers time to work with their produce suppliers.
Right. So you mentioned something about a window there. So I'm guessing this is a question you hear from clients all the time is, so if the produce inspections, they're not happening until 2019, as you mentioned on the previous slide. How do you guys recommend companies verify the farms are actually following the produce rule if the FDA is not doing any inspections yet? Do you have any suggestions or best practices or things to be considering there?
Yeah, that's going to be a little bit of an issue, and it's going to require more resources is kind of what it comes down to. So the rules written in the supply chains that you could rely on a government inspection, and if they pass that, you can kind of rely on that and use that as information to say they are in compliance. But without any FDA inspections happening, what do you have to rely on? So right now, it's a matter of putting in the footwork and either using kind of good agricultural practice audits or third-party audits, which are at the time being voluntary practices that the produce safety rule is kind of supplementing once it actually gets implemented. But there are lots of audit programs available if you don't have the resources to personally visit all your suppliers, especially when they're not in the United States, which makes travel a little more difficult. But yeah, relying on that and making sure you have a direct communication line with your supplier and making sure that you know that they understand the requirements.
Yeah, okay. Good advice there. So there's also some water requirements and some other provisions that are coming out. I know you wanted to touch upon as well.
Yeah, once again, touching on this idea of what aspects or how is the FDA or how is anyone for that matter going to be enforcing the produce safety rule? And then since it's such a new kind of regulatory scheme, farms have never had mandatory food safety inspections before FSMA. There's new things, and even during the rulemaking process, you saw some about biological soil amendments that there were timelines for when you had to land apply them, but now it's kind of, even during the rule, they realized they didn't have adequate science to justify that, so that's basically on reserve right now. So the produce safety rule doesn't have any timeline requirements, and FDA kind of just said, well, you can look into the organic requirements for some general ideas, but we're going to reevaluate this from a food safety point. But then after the rule was finalized, the agricultural water quality requirements were actually put into rule, but through outreach with industry and farms in general, it's kind of come up that this is unenforceable. We don't know how to do this. It's too complex. The system that the rule set up was kind of hard to understand on averaging means and water quality samples and creating profiles. And so not too long ago, the FDA released a proposed rule to extend the compliance requirements, compliance deadline requirements for agricultural water quality. So that is still in the public comment period, so people can write into FDA and say, yes, you should delay these, or no, you shouldn't delay these, so it's a little bit up in the air. But if it goes through as the FDA has proposed, the earliest date for these large farms that we're talking about to comply with agricultural water testing requirements would be in January of 2022. So they're you're realizing there's a lot of difficulty in that enforcement and proposing several years extension to be able to find a way to work with farmers on that one.
Yeah. You know, you talk about this, you know, being up in the air and how difficult this is. I mean, are you guys seeing anything where this rule is causing more challenges for farmers in you know, with regard to compliance? And is the FDA doing anything specific to help that you can see so far?
Yeah, kind of. I think it helps in certain senses just because the rule has been complex and it's new, and there's some real kind of bright line, kind of black or white aspects that were set up that makes it confusing for farmers to even determine sometimes which rule applies to them. For example, this I wrote that FDA has announced enforcement discretion in a different, it's kind of like a guidance document, but this one is basically just saying we're not going to enforce these provisions in the produce rule for a while until we kind of figure out how to do it. And that is directly related around to this confusion as to facilities that do the same things, but one would be covered by the produce rule and one would be covered by the preventive controls rule and have much more stringent and difficult to implement requirements. And that's the sense that we all know what a farm is, I guess. It's where everything's produced, and that's kind of easy to determine, but that's not really the prototypical farm that we see in the world today. Many farms are separate plots of land with shared warehouses or co-ops or different farmers that co-own a warehouse. So you're looking at this, and FDA made this bright line rule that, yes, farms are the produce rule, but then there's such thing as a secondary activities farm. And a secondary activities farm is a facility or building or warehouse that's not located on the actual farm where the crops are grown, but is owned by that farmer. If that facility that's not on the farm is owned at least, the farmer owns at least 50% of the facility, and at least 50% of the farming products that are packed or held at that facility are produced on that farmer's farm, he would be produce rule. However, if he only owns 25% of the facility and shared it with 4 other farmers, that facility becomes a production facility that would be preventive controls. And so there's kind of this, FDA said, well, in that situation, we're going to be having some enforcement discretion, which is going to be subjective when they're coming around. In some issues, they may decide to enforce the more stringent rule after seeing what they see at a facility or something. But they've said, you know, if you, in reality, are doing the exact same thing as a farm facility or a secondary farm facility, we're going to be kind of easygoing on you and not necessarily bring enforcement actions. And the other one is farms are only conducting low-risk activities, and they have a really long list of what they consider a low-risk activity, such as drying grapes or just minimal things, but other things that are typically done on farms, some such as coloring of fruits and vegetables and just minor treatments don't fit into those low risk. And so FDA is going to be looking into those as they start to have more outreach with farms and as they're getting out on the farm to have enforcement discretion that aspect as well.
Wow, a lot of moving pieces. This is why we got you here. So let's talk about things that should be on our radar and be thinking about as all these pieces do continue to move.
Yeah, and this is more or less a summary slide, you could say. And the first one that FDA has mentioned several times in recent weeks is that they will be releasing a specific produce safety guidance. As of now, they've really focused on the preventive controls rule as far as guidance, just because they've released more or less a book of guidance on that one. But the produce safety rule guidance should be in its final stages. Leaders in FDA have both mentioned that in recent conversations, and so I expect that to be coming down. I'm saying hopefully within the month, but that'll provide a lot of help for farmers in determining what applies to them and what they need to be doing over this next year as they're implementing their programs, as they're preparing for FDA inspection. The ways that you can, there are lots of experts out there. We work with lots of farmers, and we have helped people start to develop programs, especially some of those farms that are kind of in that gray area of should we be following preventive controls or should we be following the produce rule. But there's lots of parties out there. I mentioned for the time being, without FDA inspections, you can be looking at voluntary good agricultural practice inspections or audits in an effort to make sure that the farm is up to par. The other big thing, so enforcement is the issue. FDA realized immediately they don't have the resources to send inspectors to every farm. They also realize that they don't have the local expertise they need to deal with farms, because in general, what you're growing in Florida and how you grow it in Florida is different than what and how you grow in Washington. So they're looking to work with state agencies and local health departments in order to have, I guess, an actual inspection group. And they've had over the last 3 years, I think there's 43 states that are participating in the grant program, but FDA has been releasing to NASDA and state food safety programs somewhere in the range of 25 to 35 million over the last few years, so they can start preparing their farmers. And the first phase was training farmers, and that's still going on. And then the next phase of that grant program is actually going to be to help the states establish their own inspection. So in all those states that are participating, it's likely that you'll see your state inspectors, not an FDA inspector, which they're hoping will help the farmers because the local inspectors would be more familiar.
Right.
With that, they've also implemented their Produce Safety Alliance. They're working with state extension officers. They have regional offices sent up through many land grant institutions and universities, state extension agents, to try to help people understand. One thing that farmers should be looking into, the produce safety training requirement is mandatory in this one. So you can't say, well, I've been doing this for 20 years. This rule specifically says you need to attend this specific training. One person on the farm does at least. And that's administered by the Produce Safety Alliance, and it's typically a 2-day course that the farmers can get that training, but that's the bare minimum. There's no work experience in this one that can get you around that specific training.
Okay.
But, yep, that's kind of it in a nutshell. That state program that run with NASDA and the FDA, they are, if you're interested, looking for farms to volunteer to have a team of state FDA and academic specialists come to your farm and walk you through kind of the produce safety rule. They'll give you a check, and they won't, it's kind of it's defined kind of somewhat loosely. They basically say we won't do anything as far as enforcement unless we have to. And what would make them have to is if they realize while they're there, there's a major issue at the farm and you've already sent some of that produce into commerce.
Right, right.
So,
okay.
So that's something that's a good resource to look into.
No, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. We'll try and get some info posted to the LinkedIn group. There's a couple of questions that have come in also about has the FDA started any FSMA inspections of food processors, or do you have any updates on anybody's, more on the processing side for produce?
So the process side would be that preventive controls rule, and those inspections have been going on. We have been seeing, so I kind of mentioned, we started seeing some FDA inspectors come in and do just a good manufacturing practice type of inspection at some of those facilities, but we are seeing them more and more commonly come into those facilities and inspecting per the entire preventive controls rule, looking at your hazard analysis, recall plans, going through all that. And another trend is they're not necessarily keeping schedules that they have in the past. In the past, you could have expected an inspector to be there between 9 and 10 in the morning and be there for a week, but now you're seeing them come into some facilities during third shift or, yeah, just kind of broadening the scope of their inspection. So you kind of have to be ready 24/7.
Yeah. Is there another question someone had? It's a good one. Is there any criteria for how they decide who they're inspecting first?
Processed produce is so they risk classification, and so the way FSMA is set up is they had to classify all facilities in either high risk or low risk, and they set up timelines that you have to inspect all high risk facilities it's every 3 years now, and all low risk facilities every 5 years. So they look at the general category, and produce is considered a risky food, especially processed produce at this point. But then they are also looking into compliance history for that type of thing. So if you have had issues in the past, it is more likely that they will be there again. They look into the historical production interaction with the facility as well as the risk category of the food they're producing.
Yeah. Okay. I'd be remiss if I didn't add, this question snuck in, and it's one of my favorites with all the acronyms in this industry, so I got to ask it, but the question came in about, you've mentioned preventative controls a few times. Is there any reason why the FDA has dropped the acronym HARP-C in favor of just preventative controls? Any insight on that one? Or are we just trying to get rid of another acronym?
I still say HARP-C sometimes, and I think it depends on the person a little bit. From the get-go, HARP-C had people who really didn't like it since it's so close to HACCP, and it just seemed nonsensical. So there's been a little bit of pushback because, I mean, the acronym is one thing, but then when you get into the programs aren't the exact same, and it creates some confusion in industry as to how to actually implement a HACCP program versus a HARP-C program. And the real difference is that the HARP-C has preventive controls that exist that wouldn't exist in a HACCP critical control system. So I think they sorry if that was confusing, but that's about as I can get.
Oh, trust me, there's a lot to it. No, it's good to hear your perspective on it. I had to smile when I saw that question. So, well, listen, we're out of time. I want to make sure we respect everybody's schedule. We have a great LinkedIn group that many of you have joined. We encourage you to, if you're online now, go over to LinkedIn, look up FSMA Fridays, and click to join, and we'll get you access there. We carry over any questions we don't get to there, and of course trying to keep the conversation going throughout the course of the month. And of course, you can see how advantageous it is to have someone like Eric and his team at TAG to help you out. So encourage you to reach out to them if you have additional questions, you need some help and consultations. You can reach them at achesongroup.com. And they got a ton of great stuff on the website. Eric mentioned how he's writing there. They're constantly sharing some great content on there, and it's a really great resource to have. And as I mentioned, if you're looking for ways to save time and money as you go through all this compliance and regulation, that's what we do on the software side. So we're helping food companies run their food safety, quality, compliance programs a lot more efficiently and effectively. So we'd love to show you what we're up to. You can check us out at SafetyChain.com. And in terms of what's up next, we'll be sending out a link to the recording. We've got a new series out that's a little more on the training side. So keep an eye out for our Beyond Compliance series, which is really kicked off with a bang this year. And we'll be doing a demo day also next week, if for those of you want a quick tour of the software and what we're up to. And the tag newsletter continues to be one of the fan favorites. A lot of the content and info they release, you can catch on one aggregated resource there. So our next session will be at the end of March. FSMA Friday will be on March 30th. So until then, Eric, thank you for getting through so much great stuff, and appreciate you and everybody over at the Acheson Group. And I want to thank all of you for continuing to support FSMA Fridays. Hope this was helpful, and we will see you next month.